Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you around the world joining this Bloomberg Green virtual festival. My name is Nat Bullard. I'm Chief Content Officer for BloombergNEF. I'm here with Fred Krupp of Environmental Defense, Jamie Gentoso of LafargeHolcim, and we're going to talk today about the importance of market-based solutions in thinking about climate change and about climate action. So as Malika mentioned at the open, please do send us questions. We look forward to hearing from you all, and we'll work as many as we can into this heads up and very interactive chat here. But I'm going to begin by having my guests here tell me a bit about their organizations. It's always good to level set and let this global audience know who you are and what you're doing. So Jamie, let's start with you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm Jamie Gentoso. I am the CEO of LafargeHolcim in the U.S., our operations for the cement business. LafargeHolcim is the largest cement manufacturer in the world. We operate in over 100 countries with 70,000 employees.
Thank you very much. And for the sake of this conversation, I think most of the world is aware of the environmental footprint that cement makes, but give us a bit of flavor of that. So to tell us why it is that you're here in this discussion.
Yes, so the cement industry produces about 7 to 8% of the world's CO2. We at LafargeHolcim have been working to decrease that over time. In fact, over the last 30 years, we have decreased our carbon intensity by about 30%. And we are committed to decreasing it even more and believe in even a net zero carbon future. So we are, a part of this here to talk about today how committed we are to doing that, and the fact, the way and the path to get there for us, we believe, requires a price on carbon.
Very good. Thank you very much. And Fred?
Yeah, the Environmental Defense Fund has 2.5 million members. We work all over the world. We're based here in the United States. What we're known for is seeking practical answers, ambitious answers to the world's biggest environmental problems. We will partner with companies or community groups, labor, you name it. We like bringing people together to figure out how to take apart a big problem and put together an answer that works.
Thank you very much. So on that note of checking in on big problems and with some innovation, we had a report out from the Business Roundtable yesterday, I believe, that's talking about the business case for climate action. And if I remember the quote correctly, recognizing the need for U.S. congressional action on climate. I know that both of you had something to do with that. So Jamie, I'd like to kick it to you to tell us a bit about that and also give me a bit of reflection on how that came about.
Yeah, so I'm actually a part of the CEO Climate Dialogue. The Business Roundtable is a little bit separate from that, but we are a group of CEOs that have come together. We represent over $1 trillion in revenue that have come together to lobby Congress for a price on carbon. This is significant because in the end, along with the Business Roundtable that represents over $7 trillion in revenue as well, business is crying out that we need to take action on climate policy. So in the end, you've got the business community that's ready for Congress to move on policy.
And tell me a bit about how that came about. I mean, was this something that was a matter of controversy with you and your colleagues? Was it something that seemed obvious that you had to do any persuasion about? What was the case? Tell me about that.
In the end, for us, it was our ability to come together with other like-minded businesses that believe the same thing that we do. We believe that this won't happen unless this is a bipartisan effort. So as a business community, if we can come together and show that we are ready for this, we think that it is more likely to happen. In the end, we need a market-based policy that is durable, that adds certainty to business. In the end, for us to become carbon neutral, it will require large investments, and we need policy that will, has a long-term vision about what can happen, and it can't be changing as the offices change.
That's right. And Fred, what do you think about this? Like over time, how is the interest in doing something that's, to Jamie's point, durable and not likely to change? How has the thinking on that evolved in the time that you've been observing and taking part in this?
Well, I think I completely agree with Jamie. Having a law that's passed exclusively by one party and then perhaps repealed by another party if the balance of power changes doesn't give the environment certainty that there's going to be durable protection and doesn't give the business community certainty as to what the rules are. I mean, I would say that the Business Roundtable, which has, more than 200 executives from America's leading companies, about 27% of the total U.S., market cap. Last year they said the purpose of a company is to serve all stakeholders, not just shareholders. That got a lot of attention.
It did.
And this really put some meat on the bones. They've issued a set of guiding principles for how the United States Congress should approach climate policy, very consistent with the CEO climate dialogue that Jamie and I are both part of. This is huge because it recognizes, for the sake of business can't persist into the future with the inaction. We're seeing the cost of inaction in the wildfires right now in the West and the hurricanes that are more ferocious than ever before. So the Business Roundtable calling on the U.S. to lead, calling on Congress to act, calling for a market-based solution. I think it is really important news and a game changer in terms of the readiness of the business community to be constructive part of solving the problem. The CEO climate dialogue, a week ago, Jamie and I joined with, other CEOs. There's 22 companies involved. And we went on a virtual visit to Capitol Hill together, lobbying, actually companies putting their shoulder behind, telling senators and congressmen we're here to support their efforts to finally deal with the climate crisis.
And Jamie, is this something that could have taken place 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Or is this really something that is about the moment we're in now?
I believe it should have taken place 5 years ago or 10
Indeed.
years ago. But I think the fact is that we are seeing inaction, and as a business community, we've decided that we need to come together and show Congress that we are willing to work together with them to see this happen. The important part of it also for us is that as we move forward with any sort of policy, that the competitiveness is we are preserving the competitiveness of U.S. companies and such. In the end, that comes along with some of the principles that I talked about before in terms of making it durable and giving us certainty and all of that kind of thing. So we are an energy intensive, trade exposed industry. So that is a difficult thing for us. And in the end, we need to make sure that there is a transition period as we move forward. So as a business community, we've come together with this set of principles that helps, we think, Congress devise policy that can help maintain competitiveness of U.S. companies.
See, I think that this is crucial. There's this notion often that you get if you take a very political lens on this, that regulation is going to be anti-competitive. But that's not the sense that I have personally, certainly from work that I've done on this in my time. But it doesn't sound like that it resonates with you either, that there's a case for certainty actually being a competitive advantage for U.S. business. And I'd like to hear from both of you about that a little bit more, because I think it's worth emphasizing for our audience here.
Well, I think protecting U.S. competitiveness is important, and policy needs to be designed in a way that makes sure that happens. Other criteria is we need to do this in the least costly way. We need to drive investment to build jobs and promote equity. But we're finding, we're in a transition from the economy we've had to the economy of the new century, which is going to be a cleaner economy. And countries that put rules in that say, here's the certainty, we are going to move to cleaner electricity, cleaner cement, cleaner steel, cleaner ways of moving from here to there, shipping, trucking, aviation. Those are the economies that are going to be driven to develop the technologies and have a ready-made domestic market to sell them. It's going to help us rebuild from the pandemic and build an economy that can endure into the next century?
Now, I've got a pretty good idea of what looks like a durable and economy-wide policy measure that would uh, both provide some surety, but also hopefully unlock a lot of innovation. But I'd like to hear from both of you. Like, what would be the first most of the policy measures you would want to get that certainty? Jamie, I'll kick that to you.
I mean, I mentioned a couple of the things already. I mean, in the end, we do need it to be bipartisan, right? Both parties support it. We can move forward with that. It does need to take care of, we are trade exposed, so make sure that, we aren't at a disadvantage because of that. A transition period is something that is also very important. So there are numerous parts. And then the other piece, I think Fred also mentioned as well, is the reinvestment. So in the end, we will not be able to, from the cement industry side, be able to fully decarbonize unless there is more money and research put into carbon capture. As a part of a fundamental part of producing cement, we actually take in limestone and it releases a CO2 in the process, right? So we're heating it up, taking CaCO3 and releasing actually a CO2. So the manufacture of cement and the use of concrete is not going away anytime soon. Second most consumed product in the world next to water. And you can't imagine your world literally without concrete. So, in the end, investment into carbon capture is something that's also very important to us.
And I appreciate that. I think it's important in this conversation in particular to bring a lot of these discussions to ground in terms of fundamental chemistry. Like this is just the nature of how this industry actually works. Like there's really no getting around it. And that does point to having a durable commitment, having some R&D and deployment as well, and also to having signals that are clear, right? So, are we talking a carbon price here? Are we talking something that's economy-wide that hopefully lasts for decades? What are we talking about here?
The North Star, in my view, is something that is economy-wide, does last for decades. As you know well, when you have something, pollution that you can just throw into the air, use the atmosphere as a garbage can, there's no incentive not to keep throwing it into the air.
Right.
So putting a price on what the economists say is an externality, we can just think of it as pollution. Putting a price on that creates an incentive for everyone to innovate and clean up. So that's number one, economy-wide. Number two is the price on carbon. Number three is there should be certainty. We have to have a goal of, in my view, decarbonizing the economy, net zero by 2050 sooner if possible, and interim goals, ambitious goals for 2030. So that environmental certainty is key. That's the only thing the climate knows, is if we're achieving these reductions. The last thing is equity. We've seen the inequitable effects of the pandemic. We've got to make sure that any system that's set up protects vulnerable communities, protects everyone from air pollution, and creates investment in jobs in a way that's fair and equitable.
I'm curious about that because I'm wondering if, especially at the moment we're in right now, there's not space to make the argument that doing this sort of economy-wide tax on carbon has a dividend in terms of being redistributional, in terms of being able to provide that equity. Do you think there's anything that works into that as a selling point as opposed to just one of the requirements? Is that something that you could see having some political legs behind it?
Yes, I think that's going to be up to a lot of negotiations on Capitol Hill.
Right.
But the fact that a price on carbon is taxing something that's bad as opposed to jobs, income, labor.
Right.
The price that you're taxing this bad thing, and then you get revenues in a time when our government needs revenues, and you can you can create equitable investments or investments that create equity, better said. I think that could be a selling point.
I'd be curious to see how that plays out, because we're seeing certainly the very sharp and the very apparent end of climate inaction right now, with fires and floods impacting sort of across the economy across geographies in ways that I think are becoming harder and harder to ignore. Jeannie, I'd like to talk a bit about the innovation side of this, because this is one of my personal things that's always fascinated me, is what with a market signal will you do? Like what is your RD&D capability waiting to do if you had a price on carbon?
Well, for us in the end, we are looking at right now currently putting a carbon capture unit on one of our plants. So we have 13 plants in the U.S. The fact is, though, this right now, the technology that's there for carbon capture is extremely expensive. And we are actually working with currently one of the, I guess, least costly or believed to be least costly scaled up ability to capture carbon. And it's likely going to be somewhere in the $300 million range. So from our perspective, as we would move forward, it would be more investment in looking to find lower cost ways to capture carbon. That's one of the big inhibitors from our perspective and moving forward. The plant where it will be captured, looking at 6,000 tons a day of CO2. So these are large scale capture units, not just small. And, a lot of work needs to be done to find the right technology to really lower the cost of that overall.
And do you see this potentially as competitive differentiator as well? Because this is another thing that, in theory, if a market signal is clear and it gives you something to act on, do you see this as something you could use to differentiate the business as well?
100%. I mean, in the end, for us, this is about sustainability in terms of business continuance, right? So we need our business to be able to continue in for the future. And I think our customers are starting to care more, right? They want to work with people who are concerned about the environment and are not polluting. So I think at some point we will see a paradigm shift, and that, businesses or the cement industry, you will not be able to sell your products if you are not doing things like capturing carbon or making sure you're reducing, your carbon footprint through your combustion emissions and such. So in the end, I see it something as not just the right thing to do from the climate perspective, but that our customers will demand it in the future.
So, and that part is very interesting to me, and I think very key, is that there's a demand pull on this, not just the legislative push, right? You're starting to hear about it from customers. Tell me what the flavor of those conversations is like. Is this a sort of, we're curious what your approach is, or is it got a bit more teeth on it than that?
Yeah. So, I mean, in the end, right now, you have more interest from building owners and designers and such from the low carbon aspect. So I will admit that we still struggle from our customer base and contractors and such in this demand for a low carbon product. So that is one of the things that we're seeing this pull more so from the owners, right? We heard in the opening here that buildings are responsible for 40% of the world's CO2. So, we need to make sure that as we build those buildings, the materials that go into them have the lowest embodied carbon possible. So, and that is what you get with concrete, but it can get even lower carbon. So, in the end, I think you have owners that are really starting to demand low carbon products and low carbon solutions. And that will pull it into our customers who are asking us, what can I do? And what are my next steps to have low carbon concrete?
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, and coupled of course with strong policy, that's you've got a push and pull there to help make that happen if it's to happen. Fred, give me a bit of reflection on the virtual summit that you had. I'd like to hear how that went if Capitol Hill was more receptive than in the past, less if today's moment is different than it was before.
Yeah, I think today's moment is different. I think also people are looking ahead and seeing that the possibility of a change in administration could open up a lane for a completely new policy. So the conversations were actually far more encouraging than I expected. People are poised to act. I'd like to go back, though, to the question you asked about customers, and I'd be interested, Jamie, in your reaction about employees. What I've heard from other CEOs is it's not only customers and sustainability into the future, but more and more employees at all sorts of firms want to work at a company that's part of solving one of the biggest challenges that humanity had. Is that true at Lafarge?
That is 100% true. I mean, we all want to be proud of what we do every day, and we all want to feel as though we are making a positive impact on the earth, or in what we do. So we want to go home and sleep at night and feel like we are doing the right things. And I think all of our employees believe in what we're doing and the changes that we're making. I think change is happening faster than previously before, and I think we are starting to embrace it. I think we have also this new generation of employee that won't come to work for a company unless you are doing the right things. So, very important as we market ourselves as an employer that, we make sure that we are talking about the things that we are doing to improve. And, that's one thing is, as I talk to people, like if you really want to make an impact, don't go work for a company that already has a low carbon footprint. Come work for a company that has a large carbon footprint where you can make a dramatic difference.
Yeah, thanks, Fred, for taking my notes and baiting me to the question. But that's all right. It's all right. We've got one actually coming in from the audience, so bear with me a moment. It says, what are the tips of the trade to engage stakeholders and shareholders that are not necessarily on board with progressive or sustainable initiatives? Now, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative, and I think we can split out progressive and sustainable if we want. But so let me repeat. What are the tips of the trade to engage stakeholders and shareholders that are not necessarily on board with sustainable initiatives? Fred, you want to go on that first, and then I'll kick to Jamie.
Something else happened last week besides the virtual summit of the CEO climate dialogue visiting on Capitol Hill, and besides yesterday's news of the big statement from the Business Roundtable, and that the Trump administration had the president's appointees on the Commodity Futures Trading Commission had set in motion a subcommittee to look at the risk of climate on our economy. And the report that came out is what I would share with stakeholders and shareholders just out last week. It says the risks of climate, the damage that's already happening, is so big that they recommend also a market-based price on carbon.
And full disclosure, I wrote part of that report, so I would also recommend it to people. But yes, this was something that we constructed with the express purpose of riding through any near-term noise. Right? It's designed to be apolitical and to be durable in that way. But yes, I would hope that it lays out a playbook for why, from a business perspective, things need to be approached and managed. I'll give you actually one takeaway from the chairman of that advisory committee on which we sat, which is that it's about risk management fundamentally. That doesn't mean no risk; it means managing risk. So we've got another question actually coming in right now. So Jamie, maybe this one's for you. How and to what extent can we involve private capital as a funding source to achieve scale in the investments for this transition?
Yeah, we're actually seeing a lot of interest in that right now. So, in the end, I think it's from a business perspective, stating the need and just engaging with them. So we have had private capital, reach out to us and say, how can we help you in the funding of, a carbon capture unit and such. So I think it's just a matter of businesses being open to it.
Yeah, and do you need to make an active pitch, or is this inbound? Have you got people coming to you offering, or at least inquiring?
People coming to us, yeah. So we haven't had to step out there yet to look for funding. In fact, had a couple different entities come to us to say, what are you engaging in? Is there something we can help you with? Let us know when you're ready.
That's not a bad place to be. So we have literally 1 minute left. So I'm going to actually ask you both to finish up with a thought experiment. If we're here another 10 years from now having this discussion, what are we going to be thinking about 2020 and what we put together? Are we going to view it as the start of something? Are we going to view it as necessary but not sufficient? How are we going to think about it? So, Fred, looking back from 2030, what do we think of today?
I'm very hopeful. I think what's happened, partly because of the pandemic, people having a lot of time to think deeply about their lives and what's going on, partly because of the wildfires and the hurricanes. I think there's a lot of momentum coming together, people from different walks of life, from different parties saying, let's put in place the legislation we need. So I think 10 years from now, we're going to look back and see this as a turning point.
Thank you. Jamie, you get the last word.
I 100% agree with Fred. I think we're at a turning point, and we will make change, and we will have an impact in 2030. Will look much better than 2020.
I'm glad to hear that. Fred Krupp and Jamie Gentoso, thank you so much for joining me. And I think we're now back to the rest of the program. Thank you.